Hello, I am Rodrigo Sanchez, a psychoanalyst from the British Psychoanalytic Association, and I'm going to be talking today about Mourning and Melancholy of Sigmund Freud. And I'm going to try to explain, at least for me, why it's one of the most important papers in the history of psychoanalysis. And as an overview, it might look at first glance that the paper is just an explanation of the different process that a person can go through when they are confronted with a loss. One process can go towards the path of what we call the affect of mourning, go towards that section, and the other can go towards the path of melancholy. And Freud started explaining what would be a normal process of mourning, whereby he starts with the ego rebelling upon reality, kind of saying it's so painful that you want to say, I haven't lost this person. And with that initial trigger starts a process that is quite complicated not because a person is gone, it means by any ways that the relationship the person has with them has ended. Actually, quite the opposite. That relationship is now the central stage for whole emotional life for that person, more if it's a meaningful person for the individual that has just lost them. So basically that relationship not only continues, but is in a new place that is quite highlighted by intense emotions. So this ego starts saying, in the outside world, where this person used to be, I have nothing for me. So I will withdraw within myself, where the memories, the whole idea of this person still exists. And it's a process of self-involvement that will include a lot of remembering, re-remembering, daydreams, fantasies, symbolizing, and reintrojection. And in this process, what is basically happening progressively is that the person will re-remember that person, the person that is gone, and they will reintroject an idea of them whereby there is no hope that you will meet them in the future. That is to say, that you will not forget that person. That will be a misconception. It is not meant to forget. That is not a good process of mourning by any means. It's remembering that person without the hope that you will meet them tomorrow. So if you are still hoping that they will be there some way or another, that is still a painful act that will not let go the so-called libido. In the case of melancholy, what is going to start happening is that the person withdraws into themselves and keeps relating with the object as if the object was the person that has died. That is to say that the memories, the fantasies, all these things are still there. But pretty much not only with the hope that they will be real in the future, but that they are real in the present. You are relating with that idea as if they were still here. As if it's kind of the situation of the person that is going through a difficult bereavement of a partner that had been living with them for many years, and they still put a table with their plate and the dishes on their side for them, as if they were going to come tomorrow to have dinner or that evening or so on, like if there is still them present in their lives. And well, there are three elements here that are really important for the history of psychoanalysis. The first one is that Freud quite casually comments this idea that this process of mourning will bring back other previous process of mourning. So it's really complex, but I think that this is one of the inspirations of Melanie Klein for the depressive position. This idea of suddenly saying that there is a process that is not unique. That is to say that if you have a bereavement when you are 25, this bereavement, the moment that you lost that person, will bring back all the previous process you have. So more than being a unique event, more than being that loss that you have when you were 25, is the amalgamations of bereavements that you have, and ultimately your capacity to tolerate object loss, your capacity to process different experiences through the affect of mourning or through a melancholic depressive process. So that is quite an important element that goes towards the capacity of an individual to lose someone and to tolerate it or not. The other element that is quite important has to do with Karl Abraham. In this time, Freud was writing Mourning and Melancholy in 1913, and he sent the first draft to Abraham. I think by December 1913, he presented in 1914 and was published in 17. These dates matter for a couple of reasons. It's the same year that he was working on narcissism, and in all these letters with Abraham, there is this idea that Abraham had in mind of a cannibalistic stage of development. Basically, they had this question of how do you devour the object? How do you move from this interaction with others, where you have an apnemic memory, perception and imagery, anything that you are getting from your experiences from others, to a more complex idea of the other within your mind? That is to say that the idea, the picture that you have of others, in early stages of development can be seen as the amalgamation of different experience of pleasure, displeasure, imagery, sensor, all the things that you are recollecting, like almost gathering. But it's also a bit more complex than that. And Abraham is playing with this idea of devouring. And Freud, in Mourning and Melancholy, quotes Abraham, and he's talking about this idea that he presented as this. He says, the shadow of the object fall upon the ego. And from this point forward, the ego can treat that object as if it was the lost object himself. So two stages. One is the shadow of the object. This phrase that has been quoted many, many times and is quite important and everybody has a different take on. What is relevant is that it's beyond a process of just integrating. It's a process about identification. So when you are with that other, you suddenly are left with that essence of the other. You are left with something of the other, and then you can act as if it was the other himself, if that makes sense. You can act as if this other is the same person as if it was lost. So this shadow is capturing this sense. It's a little bit this idea when you have a kid that is playing to be their father, or that is playing with all these different things, that suddenly this role-playing, this process of identification become far more complex than just wanting to be the other. And it's as this other, this so-called object, can be treated by the individual as if it was the person himself. So in this complex move, you have a different understanding of the mind. A mind that can treat these memories of others as objects that are independent to themselves. So when Freud conveys the idea of suicide, he said, of course, it's not the ego attacking himself. It's the ego attacking an internal object that can represent someone else. When he talks about the superego, he's also talking about these ideas that is the amalgamation of your father, your mother, the law, the society, what is a transgression, what is forbidden, what is going to be your punishment. No, all of these that are internal voices that can really infringe distress upon the ego as if they were the person himself. As if you literally will be disappointing your father for not doing something right, even though your father might not be there. But that voice has been integrated as if it was. So this shadow of the object brings a new perspective on what it is, the unconscious, and what is ultimately going to be object relation. That is quite important. And the third point that for me is really relevant is the idea of how he started playing with this notion of libido. That it was there from before. Even Fleece was talking to him about this idea of losing the sexual desire and so on. And it's really important in this moment because he's trying to explore that as well on this rudiment of the theory of narcissism that he published in 1914 on the paper on narcissism. That is this kind of economic process of investing and withdrawing different affects from your internal objects and from even yourself. You can gratify different elements of life by investing libido on yourself. That is, among other things, of narcissism. Keep in mind someone that is highly vanity in himself, right? That idea that you can feel loved by loving yourself, like if that is a process of gratification from within. But in the process specifically of mourning, he's playing with this idea about how you can, the shadow of the object can be the emptiness that that person left. So it's this idea of you care for someone, but that care, that affect, that everything that you have put from that person, you need to withdraw it, right? So then the normal process of mourning, you will not expect that person to be there in the future anymore. You can remember it, you can care for them, you can be identified in some way or another, but now you have that energy, that passion, that disposition, that time, however you want to conceptualize it, to put it elsewhere. But that person left something there. And these shadows, this contracatexia, like when you could put it, is quite a complex idea about the withdrawing of libido and what it meant, and how that can be linked to depression. How can it be into losing the will to be alive, losing the will to do something that you loved to do before? How in the concept of white psychosis and the dead mother of Andre Green can be a particular way of emptiness. How in the normotic illness of Christopher Bolas can be pressing as a lack of identity and originality and so on, and clearly in Winnicott with the idea of contracatexia. But it's a whole new paradigm also of what it is, this investment and withdrawal of this weird concept called libido. So in my view, although it's a paper that is in 1914 and in many ways has been taken by modernity and different other papers of psychoanalysis that are more profound or so on, I think that is clearly a turning point for the history of psychoanalysis, and I definitely recommend you give it a go. Thank you.